Alright, we are on the next video, and we said last time we were going to leave off on this part right here, so we're going to keep continuing. So, much concerning the wisdom of the Chaldeans. It is said that the first king of the country was Aloris, and that he gave out a report that God had appointed him to be the shepherd of the people. He reigned 10 Sari. Now, a Saris is estimated to be 3,600 years, a Neros 600, and a Sosus 60. So, if we're assuming that we get a lot of our astronomy and our astrology and stuff like that from Chaldea, which is actually like a known fact, I think it's pretty safe to say that these years that they're saying here, like 3,600 years, is like a pretty accurate calculations because, I mean, we're on planet Earth, right? So the sun system's not going to change. So the astronomy and astrology wouldn't be so much different either if they're referring to certain celestial bodies as we appoint them now today. Just kind of adding to that idea and just kind of making a note of that kind of time astronomy keeping type of stuff. So after him, Alaparis reigned 3 Sari. To him succeeded Amilaris from the city of Pantibiblon, who reigned 13 Sari. In his time came up from the sea a second Annotatus, a semi-daemon, very similar in his form to Oannes. After Amilaris reigned Amemnon 12 Sari, who was the city of Pantibiblon. Then Megalaris of the same place reigned 18 Sari. Then Deos, the shepherd, governed for the space of 10 Sari. He was Pantibiblon. In his time, 4 double-shaped personages came up out of the sea to land, whose names were Eudocus, Anugamus, Anubolus, and Anementus. Afterwards, in the time of Eudorescus, appeared another Anodafus. After these reigned other kings, and last of all Xisuthros, so that in the whole the number amounted to 10 kings, and the term of their reigns to 120 Sari. And among other things not irrelative to the subject, he continues thus concerning the deluge. After Eudorus, some others reigned, and then Xisuthros. To him the deity Cronus foretold that on the 15th day of the month Decius there would be a deluge of rain, and he commanded him to deposit all the writings, whatever which were in his possession, in the city of the sun in Sippara. Xisuthros, when he had complied with these commands, sailed immediately to Armenia, and was presently inspired by God. Upon the 3rd day after cessation of the rain, Xisuthros sent out birds by way of experiment, that he might judge whether the flood had subsided. But the birds, passing over an unbounded sea without finding any place of rest, returned again to Xisuthros. This he repeated with other birds, and when upon the 3rd trial he succeeded, for the birds returned with their feet stained with mud, the gods translated him from among men. With respect to the vessel which yet remains in Armenia, it is the custom of the inhabitants to form bracelets and amulets of its wood. Of the Tower of Babel. They say that the first inhabitants of the earth, glorifying in their own strength and size, and despising the gods, undertook to raise a tower whose top should reach the sky, in the place in which Babylon now stands. But when it approached the heaven, the winds assisted the gods, and overthrew the work upon its contrivers, and its ruins are said to be still at Babylon, and the gods introduced a diversity of tongues among men, who till that time had all spoken the same language, and a war arose between Cronus and Titan. The place in which they built the tower is now called Babylon on account of the confusion of the tongues, for confusion is by the Hebrews called Babel. Alright. Now it's not very, the first inhabitants of the earth, so I'm assuming that's the Titans, right? So glorifying in their own strength and size and despising the gods. So I guess the people who were here first despise the people who came from the sky. But that's not, none of those are humans. But humans were still there. I'm assuming that's what happened. It's really hard to perceive all this as like actually like existing, or like, you know, to see it beyond like the mythology we kind of see it today. But I don't know, man. We really haven't seen much of the world out there, and if we do, we usually have it so hidden away or tucked in, because like, you know, there's people who go camping out in places in national parks, and that's all fine and dandy, but those are places that are like kind of like occupied by the government to begin with, you know what I mean? Like going outside into like, you know, beyond the wilderness, into the really really like remote areas where nobody goes to, you don't know what you're gonna find out there. And it's like, you know, maybe our governments only occupy a certain amount of land, and a certain amount of land is also not occupied at all by our government, and that those lands are not for a reason. I don't know, it's just my assertion, I guess, to some of the land that we allocate, and why we don't build cities on mountains already and whatnot. Like, we're always still building these smaller, like, plain-like areas. Because if we're going to expand the population, why don't we just utilize all the land that's already available to us, and why not some of that land be on the mountains? I know the mountains are pretty dangerous to live on, but I mean, look at the people in the Andes Mountains. Those people were living on the mountains, so to speak, right? If history tells us correctly that, you know, the mountains are pretty safe. Look at the stone buildings that stood the test of time up there, you know? All the civilizations that live on the high mountains. Just taking a sip of some coffee. Okay. After the deluge, so this one's of Abraham, so this is Abedinus talking about, this is Berosus from Josephus, and this is of Abraham. So what Berosus said: after the deluge, in the 10th generation, was a certain man among the Chaldaeans renowned for his justice and great exploits for his skill in the celestial sciences. Okay, that must be, see, it's interesting how they refer to the Chaldeans, like, as people, like, before the flood. It's kind of weird to me. Because we refer to the Chaldeans as, like, people who were just, like, the Neo-Babylonians. But I guess, like, I don't know. Because they would call the Chaldeans, like, the people of, like Nebuchadnezzar and like this Neo-Babylonian empire that was there, that kind of subjected the Israelites. Man, you know, history is kind of all over the place and kind of messy. So, of Nabonazzar, from the reign of Nabonazzar only are the Chaldeans, from whom the copy of the Greek mathematicians copy, accurately acquainted with the heavenly motions. From the reign of Nabonazzar only are the Chaldeans accurately acquainted with the heavenly motions. So before then, they were not. For Nabonassar collected all the mementos of the kings prior to himself and destroyed them, that the enumeration of the Chaldaean kings might commence with him. Okay, so I think he's pointing out right now that there's evidence that this king Nabonassar destroyed evidence of the kings before himself, and that he knew all the celestial bodies correctly and that nobody else did. But I don't know, that's kind of redundant if it's saying that like he knew all the heavenly motions correctly, but I don't know. Okay, no, I think it's what it's saying right here is like Nabonassar, like he knew all the ancient knowledge and then destroyed it, and then the people only knew like from generations for like recently forward that there was only Nabonassar, and he was like the original king, and so that he knew all the heavenly bodies. It's saying here that like it's important to have to point out that he knew the heavenly bodies correctly, and that he destroyed the kings before him. So that he did know the ancient knowledge and stuff like that. Interesting, okay. Of the destruction of the Jewish temple. He, Nabopolassar, sent his son Nabuchodonosor with the great army against Egypt and against Judea, upon his being informed that they had revolted from him, and by that means he subdued them all, and set fire to the temple that was at Jerusalem, and removed our people entirely out of their own country, and transferred them to Babylon. And our city remained in a state of desolation during the interval of 70 years, until the days of Cyrus king of Persia. He then says that this Babylonian king conquered Egypt and Syria and Phoenicia and Arabia, and exceeded in his exploits all that had reigned before him in Babylon and Chaldea. When Nabopolassar his father, when Nabopolassar his father heard that heard that the governor whom he had sent over Egypt and the provinces of Coelesyria and Phoenicia had revolted, he was determined to punish his delinquencies, and for that purpose entrusted part of his army to his son Nebuchadnezzar, who was then of mature age, and sent him forth against the rebel. And Nabuchodonosor engaged and overcame him, and reached the country again under his dominion. And it came to pass that his father Nabopolassar was seized with a disorder which proved fatal, and he died in the city of Babylon after he had reigned 29 years. So there was like an uprising in the capital, and he got assassinated, or what? I don't know. Nabuchodonosor, as soon as he had received intelligence of his father's death, set in order the affairs of Egypt and the other countries, and committed to some of his faithful officers the captives he had taken from the Jews and Phoenicians and Syrians and the nations belonging to Egypt, that they might conduct them with that part of the forces which had heavy armor, together with the rest of his baggage, to Babylonia. In the meantime, with a few attendants, he hastily crossed the desert to Babylon. When he arrived there, he found his affairs had been faithfully conducted by the Chaldeans, and that the principal person among them had preserved the kingdom for him, and he accordingly obtained possession of all his father's dominions. Okay, so Nabuchodonosor ruled after Nabopolassar, and then he crossed the desert after hearing his father's death, and then took all of his dominions. And he distributed the captives in colonies in the proper places of Babylonia, and adorned the temple of Belus and the other temples in a sumptuous and pious manner, out of the spoils which he had taken in this war. He had also rebuilt the old city and added another to it on the outside, and so far completed Babylon that none who might besiege it afterwards should have it in their power to divert the river, so as to facilitate an entrance to it. And he effected this by building 3 walls about the inner city, and 3 about the outer. Some of these walls he built of burnt brick and bitumen, and some of brick only. When he had thus admirably fortified the city, and had magnificently adorned the gates, he added also a new palace to those in which his forefathers had dwelt, adjoining them, but exceeding them in height and splendor. Any attempt to describe it would be tedious, yet notwithstanding its prodigious size and magnificence, it was finished within 15 days. In this palace he erected very high walks supported by stone pillars, and by planting what was called a pensile paradise, and replenishing it with all sorts of trees, he rendered the prospect an exact resemblance of a mountainous country. This he did to gratify his queen, because she had been brought up in Media and was fond of a mountainous situation. Okay. Or Media. I think that's Media is where I think Cyrus came from. Interesting. Very interesting. I wonder if this place still... I'm pretty sure it doesn't stand. I'm pretty sure it is all destroyed. So this seems to be like, I don't know, just a description of like something that was built by the Chaldaeans prior to Cyrus, right? And then, yeah, this is the kings after Nebuchadnezzar. So Nabuchodonosor, whilst he was engaged in building the above-mentioned wall, fell sick and died after he had reigned 43 years, whereupon his son, Evil-Merodachus, this word right here is something that Helene Blavatsky had mentioned. There's this figure called Merodach, and I think that's Marduk. I think that name is Marduk. I think it's just like an older translation of the word, or an older rendition. I don't know what the avil prefix means, but Merodachus, this is the Greek suffix, but this right here is the root, Merodach. So this is something that this is I'm pretty sure this is Marduk or Moloch, however this is like the old Babylonian god, but this is like this is like one of his sons. So we know for a fact that Hammurabi instilled in the Babylonian Empire Marduk, and that the Enuma Elish has this whole story of Marduk, and that this whole story of Marduk is it's like a newer rendition of an older story that existed, but they renamed it to be about Marduk because they were praising this god, who's Merodach. So this is just some kind of pretext to what we're about to read. So his son, evil Merodachus, succeeded him in his kingdom. His government, however, was conducted in an illegal and improper manner, and he fell victim to a conspiracy which was formed against his life by Neriglissarus, his sister's husband, after he had reigned about 2 years. Upon his death, Neriglissarus, the chief of the conspirators, obtained possession of the kingdom and reigned 4 years. He was succeeded by his son Laborosaurakudus, who was but a child and reigned for 9 months. For his misconduct he was seized by conspirators and put to death by torture. After his death, the conspirators assembled and by common consent placed the crown upon the head of Nabonidus, a man of Babylon and one of the leaders of the insurrection. It was in his reign that the walls of the city of Babylon, which defend the banks of the river, were curiously built with burnt brick and bitumen. Oh, okay. That's an interesting fact. It was in his reign that the walls of the city of Babylon, which defend the banks of the river, were curiously built with burnt brick. I wonder why he says curiously built. A man of... Okay, so... In the 17th year of the reign of Nabonidus, Cyrus came out of Persia with a great army. Okay, so let me go back up real quick. Just gonna kind of pull the... Okay, so Nebuchadnezzar ruled. These are all these kings that got a bunch of power in Chaldea, and this is how it... Okay, so they're explaining how it fell. So there's a bunch of conspiracy going on within the throne, and this weakened everything. But then there was this period of peace for freaking 17 years with Nabonidus, because it seemed like he had a lot of control, because this statement right here makes it seem like, you know, there was some stability within, I guess Babylonia at that time. Okay, so into the country of Babylonia. As soon as Nabonidus perceived he was advancing to attack him, dang, he assembled his forces and opposed him, but was defeated and fled with a few of his adherents and was shut up in the city of Borsippas. Upon this, Cyrus took Babylon and gave orders that the outer walls should be demolished, because the city appeared of such strength as to render a siege almost impracticable. From thence he marched to Borsippas to besiege Nabonidus, but Nabonidus delivered himself into his hands without holding out the place. He was therefore kindly treated by Cyrus, who provided him with an establishment of Carmania, but sent him out of Babylonia. Nabonidus accordingly spent the remainder of his life in that country, where he died. Of the feast of Sashia, Berosus, in the first book of his Babylonian history, says that in the 11th month, called Lus, is celebrated in Babylon the feast of Sashia for 5 days, in which it is the custom that the masters should obey their domestics, one of whom is led around the house, clothed in a royal garment, and call him they call Zoganes. That's a weird damn ritual. Megasthenes from Aberdeenus. Okay, so Aberdeenus seemed to have been written about a lot of these Chaldean authors. So he must have had some like foreknowledge of all this stuff. So of Nebuchadnezzar. So Aberdeenus, in his history of the Assyrians, has preserved the following fragments of Megasthenes. Wait, who's writing about this? Okay, so who says that Nabuchodonosor, so that's Nabopolassar's son, and that's the one who got conspired, having become more powerful than Hercules, invaded Libya and Iberia, and when he had rendered them tributary, he extended his conquests over the inhabitants of the shores upon the right of the sea. It is moreover related by the Chaldeans that as he went up into his palace, he was possessed by some god, and he cried out and said, O Babylonians, I, Nabuchodonosor, foretell unto you a calamity which must shortly come to pass, which neither Belus my ancestor nor his queen Beltus have power to persuade the fates to turn away. A Persian mule shall come, and by the assistance of your gods shall impose upon you the yoke of slavery, the author of which shall be a Mede, the vain glory of Assyria. Before he should thus betray my subjects, oh, that some sea or whirlpool might receive him, and his memory be blotted out forever, or that he might be cast out to wander through some desert, where there are neither cities nor the trace of men, a solitary exile among rocks and caverns, where the beasts and birds hide alone abide. But for me, before he shall have conceived these mischiefs in his mind, a happier end will be provided. Okay, well, they're obviously talking about Cyrus, so it's interesting to see how this comes about. I mean, this could obviously just be some like kind of like just folklore that got passed, because I mean, I don't know, that'd be crazy if this actually may have happened. But I mean, they're calling upon this god, which we already know who it is, based on, you know, it's obviously like this Babylonian god Marduk, which we just saw in one of the names of this guy's son, Nabuchodonosor, right? Or was it Nabonidus' son? I don't know. We got to go back up and check it again. But this is also interesting here, where they invaded Libya and Iberia. Those are the most western parts of the Mediterranean, and there's really no accounts of like any of like the Assyrians kind of talking about those lands, or really in those lands, at least in like some of the general studies that I learned, because you have like the Phoenicians and stuff like that, who were like seafarers, and they had like a lot of like influence, right, on like the coast of the Mediterranean. But a lot of these historians don't talk about like the influence that these groups had over in like areas where Spain and West Africa are, and even Italy. Like these groups were in Italy. Like these are probably like the ancestors, or like the Etruscans, the ancestors of like the Etruscans, and like the very like more native groups that we suppose that are in like Italy and parts of like Spain and whatnot. Because these people were over there. It's just none, for some reason it's not mentioned until like the Greek colonies that were said to have like come out from Greece and into like Magna Graecia, which is like southern Italy, and then like over into like Iberia, and then that's where we get more of the history of like, you know, the Roman Empire and then their influences on those lands. But any speaking of like the Assyrian Empire or the Neo-Babylonian or Chaldeans, going into like places like Libya or Spain, there's really just no like context for it at all, which is really interesting because, you know, there was a lecture that I was listening to the other day, and they kind of mentioned something that I did learn, that like you know, there was a lot of Muslim influence in Spain before all the Christian influence. A lot of it was like really early pagan stuff that was like Sir Roderick was ruling like Spain, and they were like I think a Visigothic group, and these are people that were like kind of like I guess early like Christians, or people that did adhere to their like earlier. I really don't know how it works and stuff like that, because all that stuff came at a later time period, especially when the Carolingian family comes into power, and that comes into power like after the Muslims like get kind of like pushed out of Spain and parts of West Africa, and so they're more in like Egypt and whatnot, and parts of like Tunisia and whatnot. But for the most part, yeah. So I mean, going back to this whole idea, I think this is just really an interesting point. I really hope I can find more history on like, you know, their influences on those areas, because I definitely like can see like a ton of influence in like Spain and stuff like that. But these people, but I don't have any like history or anything that I know of like from my general studies that talks about like Phoenician or Neo-Babylonian influence in Spain. That would be an interesting topic. I might find some articles like that, actually. Now I'm like really curious about that. So maybe I'll investigate that. I'm really curious now. Oh, and by the way, I'm no longer kind of conspiring or kind of like holding any more suspicion on these translations. I feel like these translations are pretty solid translations, and that me trying to translate what's being said here is going to be pretty one-to-one over here. I translated some other stuff, and I was like, okay, well, I'm not really getting anything out of this because these seem to be like the exact translations. I can show you guys, but it'd take too much time. But from the AI that I translated some of this stuff with, it seems to be like almost the same thing as what Cory has already translated for us. So I think we left off here. Left off right here. So I think I'll end the video and I'll start on this next part in the next one. And then this will talk about, yeah, so what is it? I can't pronounce the dang name. Nabuchodonosor, his son, see, look, right there. Malorucus. You see how it's like Marduk or like Moloch? It gets translated in a slightly different way, but it's funny to also know one more thing before we end the video. It's also funny that like in more of the Oriental languages, like Japanese for instance, the L and the R are like pronounced exactly the same. So it's funny to see that in these Assyrian languages, you see the L and the R kind of being interchanged. I see that when I'm translating Akkadian. I see like the L and the R are kind of like they're one and the same kind of like syllable or consonant. It's just really really curious stuff, to be honest, to just kind of like take note of that pattern. So like I said, we'll continue on this next part. Really want to get into this more. This is really good stuff. So